Good morning everyone and welcome to Health Horizons. Today marks an exciting chapter in our thought leadership journey as we unveil a fresh identity that reflects our evolving vision and purpose. Our new series is designed to support leaders in your business by addressing the challenges and opportunities that are shaping the future of workplace health and wellbeing. It's part of our commitment to you to keep you updated on emerging trends, cutting-edge technologies and evolving practices in healthcare. We aim to anticipate challenges and opportunities that shape the future of workplace health and wellbeing, so you always feel one step ahead. So today we'll be discussing why addiction doesn't stop at the office door. The increase in remote access to technology has fueled behavioural addiction, such as gambling and social media, all beyond the boundaries of home. 44% of all adults in the UK gambled in the last 4 weeks. That's over 22 million of us. People in the UK spend over 24 hours every week online, and 35% worry about online platforms affecting their mental health. Bupa has also observed a significant rise in pre-authorised patients seeking treatment for addiction, with a notable increase of nearly 35% from 2019 to 2023. Organisations who overlook the broader spectrum of addictions are therefore at risk of unexpected workplace challenges, including financial risks, low productivity and increased absence. Today, we'll discuss why businesses need to adapt their current programmes to future-proof how they support a broader range of addictions through preventative measures and a more supportive culture. So, for today's session, I'm pleased to be joined by our three experts. Joining our panel are Dr. Caroline Wood, Head of Behavioural Insights and Research at Bupa, Haj Ghali, International Speaker, Entrepreneur and Recovered Gambling Addict, and Professor Mark Antonio Spada, Professor of Addictive Behaviours and Mental Health and Clinical Advisor to Jack, who are one of Bupa's partners. Now, send us your questions throughout the session. We'll answer as many as we can a little bit later on. We've also got a couple of lovely polls for you. We know you love a poll, so you'll see those as we go through. Today, we're going to be covering three areas. Firstly, we will explore addiction trends and if they're on the rise. Secondly, we'll delve into mental health and addiction and ask if the rise in poor mental health is exacerbating addiction. And lastly, we will discuss how businesses can stay ahead of emerging trends in addiction. Lots to get through, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to come to you first, Mark Antonio. Lucky you. From your experience, have you observed a rise in addiction trends in recent years, and how do you think these will manifest in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I would say since 2018, so the pre-pandemic period, there's been a significant rise in a host of addictive behaviors. Alcohol misuse is probably up 15 to 20% in the UK. It does vary a lot by region. So some regions maybe 5-10%, and some smaller parts of the UK even up to 100-150% increase. There's been a significant increase in the use of social media. Difficult to know exactly whether that use is problematic or not. It depends on the type of measures that are used in research. Some would say that there's been an increase in use, but it's not problematic in the UK and in Europe generally, whilst it's problematic in, for example, other parts of the world. Gambling has increased significantly especially since the beginning of the pandemic. So across the board, it's worsening. Over the next 5 to 10 years, I think unless certain measures are taken to manage what's happening, it's going to get worse. The reason why it's going to get worse, and probably we'll touch upon it, is because of all the stressors there are in the systems or triggers. So increasing social inequality, political instability, financial crises, disgregation of social networks. So it's really becoming difficult to manage day-to-day life. And inevitably, a natural response is to find a way of managing that is immediate and it's reinforcing. And addictive behaviors offer that opportunity.
That's really interesting. I was just, this one isn't the script, sorry, straight away. Does the alcoholism vary by age?
Yes, it will vary. First of all, alcoholism refers really to alcohol dependence. It's a relatively small percentage of the population that has alcohol dependence. It can arise at any age. Unfortunately, many people who are alcohol dependent eventually die. And so they are statistically they disappear after a certain age, although there's still many people in their 50s and 60s with alcohol dependence. One of the biggest issues in the UK, but many other European countries, is problem drinking. So people that don't drink at that clinical threshold, but drink in a way that affects their life negatively, we're talking millions of people. And that group of people has increased substantially during the pandemic. And I've seen it also in clinical practice. I still see 3-4 clients a week, and a lot of them have reported increase in addictive behaviors, and especially alcohol use over the last 3-4 years.
That's really interesting, thank you. Caroline, coming to you next. So from your perspective, how might societal changes be influencing the prevalence of addiction in recent years?
Yeah, so we mentioned a few there, so poverty, homelessness and unemployment are all markers for vulnerability to addiction developing. One piece of research, we know that requests for support, and whether that's for new cases or for relapse from addiction, are up by 35% due to the cost of living crisis. So we already know that's going on, and to add to that, we've got the fact that we're an always-on culture, so we're contactable 24/7. We've got our smartphones in our pockets, so the information is there, but there's also information pushed at us. So there's that ultimate pressure to respond to that information coming at us, but to respond quickly as well. And then finally, just another point around our environment, which was again touched on there. It plays a big role in influencing how we respond and how we behave in certain situations. And a lot of addictions can innocently perhaps start by us trying to self-medicate in order to sort of relax and cope with that level of stress that's within our environment. And it goes without saying, the more stressful environments, the more that we try and mitigate that kind of feeling of stress and try to cope by the addiction.
Great, thank you very much. It's a scary subject, this, isn't it? Harj, I'm going to move on to you next. So you have a personal story, so could you possibly share your personal journey with addiction and how it affected your professional life?
Yeah, so my story started off in 2009. I'd finished university, and on a night out in Birmingham, you know, as friends would do, went into a casino. And it's the first time I actually stepped into a casino, and it wasn't even to gamble. It was actually to get some sandwiches and some drinks, because that's what they do. But not knowing that that first bet I placed on the blackjack would lead me down a spiral of self-perpetuated gambling addiction. That led not just affecting my personal life, but also professional life. In the course of 12 years, on the 16th of June 2020, I hid this from the world. I hid it from my family, hid it from friends, from peer groups. No one would see that I was suffering in silence. I wasted £250,000 to that gambling addiction, to the point where I suffered so much mentally that I couldn't see a way out. And the only way that I could see a way out was to try and attempt suicide. And that was only on the 18th of August 2020. But I came out the other end, and that showed me a different tenacity in myself, because what people don't realise is that not only does it affect your professional life, it also affects your personal life. And most of it can stem in between, going back to what you're saying, you know, the amount of time that we spend at work, at home, you know, in the office, going around. So people would see Harj going through some erratic emotions and erratic behaviours, not realising that gambling addiction is also known as the silent killer. And that's what it was, because people are very silent to it. And that's because maybe the taboo, the stigmas, and things that are associated around it. So my experience is now, I'm on the other side of it, where I'm actually helping people to overcome their gambling addictions, mental health and recovery.
Great, thank you very much for sharing that. Again, this is probably a really obvious question to you, but I think it's important that we spell it out for people. How did it affect your professional life?
So to the point where all I would do is wake up in the morning and just think about placing the next bet. I mean, I'd wake up, even getting dressed, on the way to work, I was just thinking about what can I place my bet on next. And with the rise of smartphones, it was even more accessible. So I didn't have to go to a casino, I didn't have to go to a bookmaker's. I could sit at my desk and be on my phone. So where I'd be working, where I should be working, I wasn't, I was gambling. So it massively impacted my productivity. It massively impacted the amount of times I show up and work, because I was absent a lot. And whilst I was there, whilst I should be focusing on being super focused, I actually wasn't, because my mind was more on the gambling rather than actually the task in hand. So for professionally, I could see that it was affecting my productivity, and my managers could see this. And if I'm being honest with you, I was actually fired, more or less asked to resign, because I had actually defrauded the organisation I was working for at that time.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing. So, Mark and Tony, I'm going to come to you next. So, what trends have you witnessed in addictive behaviours in the workplace, and how have these evolved over time?
Yeah. So I think it connects to all the other points we've touched upon. I would say over the last 3 years, I mentioned earlier, there's been a significant increase in the use of alcohol.
Yeah.
And the use of technology that may be unhelpful. That means that cognition, in the form of judgment, attention, engagement at work has been affected in my mind. It became worse after 2020 because if you lock down people and simultaneously, to an extent, you scare them into compliance, which is what happened, then you have a multiplier effect of lowering mood because social connections are affected, times increasing their anxiety because of the fear of the virus, or because you want them to behave in a certain way to ensure that certain goals are met in terms of sort of health. But that period went on for a long time. And I think it created I'm not saying a generation of individuals who are helpless, but certainly it went on for 18, 24 months. And it affected people quite deeply, and we still have many individuals who have not recovered. Some would argue that even the work patterns have been affected to a point that it's negative. Individuals have become isolated, etc. This combination of heightened anxiety and the loss of these social networks for 18, 24 months has meant it was fertile ground for the development of ways of coping, as we said earlier on. So I've heard stories of individuals who, are extremely fit and healthy, who've declined completely during this period, unrelated to this, but it is related, going back to what we said earlier on. There's been a really significant increase in eating disorders. Okay, so it's another form of compulsive behavior. The other aspect about all this, which we were discussing just before we began the session, is that these are like networks. So if you start having a problem in one area, it then starts to feed into another one. And by the time you know it, you're trying to cope and deal with the byproduct of that problem. And you find yourself with 4 or 5 new new problems emerging in these contexts. Another one that is quite underestimated, another sort of problematic addictive behavior, I think, is cannabis use. So if you look at the sort of addictive behaviors at work, you'll find that up to 60 or 70% of anybody working at this moment in time in the UK has an addictive behavior. Okay,
Yeah.
if you throw in behavioral addictions with substance misuse or substance-based addictions, 7 out of 10 people have an addictive behavior. And alcohol is very high, so is gambling, by the way, but cannabis use is also present, and again, not discussed. But cannabis use has a significant impact on cognitive functioning. So decision-making and engagement, recall are all affected. So this is what I've particularly seen over the last 3 years. This sort of fertile ground events multiplied furthermore by political, social problems, wars, uncertainty, inflation. And people simply do not know what to do and are isolated too. I think there's a positive trend that I'm noticing, judging from the amount of foot flow, whatever you call it, at Clapham Junction train station. People are going back to work. Yeah, it's extremely, in my mind, it's extremely important to avoid the escalation of mental health problems that we come together. That isolation of 18 to 24 months has cost us really dearly, and addiction is one aspect of it. So I can see a lot more people at work, a lot more meetings happening, the trains are full again, it's difficult to board one. So that is the way out, is fundamentally by being together through social networks. That is maybe one of the best ways we can prevent the further rise of addictions.
That 70% is pretty scary, isn't it, as well?
It's scary, and some would argue that it's an underestimation.
Wow.
I would prefer to be conservative and say 7 out of 10
Yeah.
will have some form of addictive behavior.
Wow. Yeah.
People in employment.
Yeah. Actually, something we focus a lot on at work is connection, and that's become so much harder, and you have to do it in so many different ways now, but it really comes out of all our employee surveys as a big need. So I can recognise that, definitely. Right, Caroline, coming on to you. So how do behavioural insights inform our understanding of how employees make decisions regarding addiction in the workplace?
Yeah. So behavioural insights is all about ultimately understanding behaviour before trying to change it. And it's about bringing what we know from psychology and other associated disciplines to help us better understand ultimately why people do what they do and how they do it. So naturally, a key part of understanding addiction is in the workplace is starting with thinking about what triggers that behaviour to happen, and look into the research to think of all the factors that are ultimately fueling why people interact in that way. And there's a wealth of insights out there that tell us the type of emotions, the type of environments, and the type of context that are most likely to lead to someone struggling with addiction. We know that the decisions that we make as humans aren't always the most rational. We tend to apply shortcuts. Our brain loves shortcuts, mental rules of thumb, to try and make sense of the world around us. So knowing why people get into these routines and how these habits are developed and how the natural way that we think might distort how we develop such unhelpful behaviours is at the crux of the matter of dealing with it. So taking the time, and ultimately organisations taking the time to really understand employees and what might be triggering some of these unhelpful behaviours to emerge is really where the focus should be.
And as we just heard, if it's 7 out of 10, it kind of feels like it's a bit of an imperative to really get in amongst it. I mean, what are some of the practical things that employers could do to kind of get into that insight and understand it?
So I think there's a lot of data that companies don't realise they have. So we mentioned about touch points with employees, pulse data, getting a general grip on how the company is feeling, the company culture is a really good place to start. So exploring those one-to-one conversations that managers have with their teams, employee data as a whole, and looking at sort of the trends. You mentioned that you were absent from work as a result of your situation, looking at the trends in the data there to see where these problem areas might be, and then exploring the context as to what's driving that behaviour. So I think there's a lot of data out there that we're not exploring within businesses. That's ultimately where we need to start.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you very much. Haj, coming to you next. So from your experience, what workplace factors do you believe are contributing to the increase in addiction trends?
So, personally, I believe it's the cost of living is going up massively. We've just come through a massive pandemic, as you were saying before. So, where people were more having connections with peers and colleagues, now they're sort of self-isolated themselves at home. And we saw in the pandemic, people lost their jobs, people couldn't get jobs, so they're now lacking financial situations. So, added to that is not just the added stress that's in the home environment to make money, but then the added stress from employers trying to make sure their organisations are having productivity and increasing revenues. So that level of stress that comes in a workplace that's unbeknown to the individual, they're looking for a way out. So it's either lack of or void of. Most commonly, when it comes down to a gambling addiction, has to be finances. And when people tell me it's about something else, it's not. The number one reason why people gamble is to make money. And there's that hope that if I win that jackpot, I can change my life. And I'm speaking from experience. That's what happened with me. So it was the financial pressures that came with my work environment, because ultimately I'll be like, do you know what, this is too much. I can't handle this. So my way of just having which sounds really weird, my calm space was to go to gambling, because I could just switch off from the world. It almost becomes this whole era where the way stimulation that comes with online gambling, the way you can actually build communities with online gambling. You know, some people say, well, that's just crazy. You're speaking to people online. Well, maybe they're the people that understand me better than my work colleagues. Yeah. And part of this is that when I was trying to get support, who would I actually reach out to in my organisation? But then if I did reach out to that person, am I going to get the support, the relevant support? Will I be judged? Because these are all the things that somebody might be feeling about opening up. And part of my work as well that I was working with is a lot of money. I was managing almost about £2-3 million a month. So that amount of stress, but also how do I take that money and convert it to profits for the organizations? But then neurologically, I know we talk about this, what does that go internally to my head as a gambler? The company's profiting, so I could use the same principles and make myself profit from winning in gambling. So everything that I do has to associate around gambling. Okay, I'm switching off from work colleagues. I don't want to spend time with them because I'm trying to make money here. Actually, I feel more comfortable. I feel switched off. I feel at my calm space. I really wasn't. That's the lies I was telling myself. I was in a very toxic environment. But in a workplace, though, it's the stress. It's the traveling to and fro, time away from their family, the increased workloads that take home with them because ultimately they just want to switch off. But it comes down to focus. And because you're not focused enough, you feel like you're letting yourself down. And especially as a man speaking, my biggest thing is to make sure I'm doing things at the best of my abilities and best of my focus and best of my quality. But I really wasn't. So in a workplace, it's just understanding that if I'm trying to do everything and not one thing great, I was just causing myself more problems. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, is that we've done a few of these on lots of different subjects, but actually a common theme comes out around the workplace, which is the environment, the culture, and being able to get that support. Whilst I'm sure it would be extremely hard to us, having a safe environment surely would help.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
One statistic that came out from a study from GamCare, which showed that 10% of adults in the workplace are not just gambling, because we said 22 million people across the UK enjoy a bet, but 10% of adults in the workplace are suffering gambling harms and problem gambling. So that's 1 out of 10 people in a workplace. So that could be the person, that could be yourself if you're watching this, or it could be the person that's there next to you.
Yeah.
And noticing the things that you're saying, are there erratic behaviours? Is someone being more self-isolated? Is there a change in behaviours? I'm not saying something that's gradual over time, but more so in the moment. A simple conversation goes a very long way. And knowing that that's the statistic it is now is very, very shocking.
Yeah, absolutely. And leaders knowing their people and being there to support them and recognising that subtle change as well and being able to step in and help. So important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much for sharing. Right, we're going to move on to the next section, but before we get there, we know how much you love a poll. So the poll should be coming up on the screen. Is your business taking steps to address the potential impact of rising addiction trends? The answer is yes or no, by the way, in case you haven't seen that. And we'll give you the answer or how you voted in a little while. Right, we're now moving on to talk about mental health and whether the rise in poor mental health is exacerbating addictive behaviours. So, Mark Antonio, we're coming to you first again. Lucky you. So, from your perspective, do you think a rise in poor mental health has impacted the prevalence of addiction in the workplace?
Yeah, it's still following the same theme we've discussed, although I can't get over that statistic that you've just shared on the 10%. So going back, before I answer your question, because it's all related, going back to that point that if 1 in 10 already has a single problem to do with gambling, then when you add all the other addictive behaviors, gambling, addiction, problematic smartphone use, we might not call it an addiction, but there is a problematic smartphone use, etc. Pornography, all sorts of, it really becomes an enormous problem. So coming back to your question, yes, if you were to model it, like we do in research studies, and you look at all these variables that have come together, especially recently, there are many precipitant factors to a worsening of mental health. We mentioned them all, most of them: isolation, cost of living, crisis, general instability in society, wars. So the reality is our mental health will deteriorate. Yeah, we can try all sorts of things to avoid this happening. So engage in protective behaviors, what I would call protective behaviors, exercise, connecting with people. avoiding the news as much as we can, frankly, because they are a constant trigger for intrusive and upsetting thoughts about, what's going on in the world. So there are a series of things we can do to shield ourselves, but there is no question that there has been a hike in mental health problems over the last 3 or 4 years, in particular, I would say, since the beginning of 2020. Interwoven, or not interwoven, made worse by further crises that emerge following the beginning of 2020. So this explains, I would say that this explains 70, 80, 90% of the reasons why addictive behaviors have become more prominent. Other factors that will affect the presence of addictive behavior, or the increase of addictive behaviors, is availability. So what we said before, platforms, the speed at which information is available, seeing other people online, communities that are actually communities that you wouldn't want to be part, a community of people that sort of stimulate each other into gambling. So unfortunately, technology brings many positives to our life, but carries massive risks. And so the technology is becoming a conduit to exacerbating addictive behaviors. Not only the ones that center around technology, so gambling, which has become much easier. You can gamble whilst you're on the loo, for example. But also because technology allows you to purchase, for example, prescribed medication like benzodiazepines or antidepressants, which you shouldn't be using, quite readily. So it's, on the whole, a combination of poor mental health and availability means that addictive behaviors will be on the rise. I mean, when I was at university, not that it was my predicament or inclination to obtain drugs, I was actually drug-free, a rarity. It was difficult to get access to drugs.
Yeah.
You had to go down certain alleys at certain times of the night and know certain people. The reality is now, at university, you pick up the phone or send a message and you have a home delivery of whatever you need or want to use as a drug. So availability has increased through technological platforms.
Scary, isn't it?
It is.
I feel like I should say I was drug-free too, by the way, but it's true. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. So, Caroline, what future behavioural patterns are anticipated to contribute to both mental health challenges and addiction amongst employees?
I think it's important to say that every business is going to be unique in these. But I'm going to call out 3 in particular. And the first is around this work-life balance that we're seeing. So we're seeing many different businesses are trying out different models and different ways of working. So whether that's 100% in the office or a hybrid model or even completely remote, that involves a hell of a lot of change. So you're going to need to support your people through that change and give them time to do so. Give them time to adapt to what their work-life balance needs to look like, the things that they need to put in place to ensure that they're able to switch off at the end of the day. They're able to shut that office door if they're working from home. They're able to take the time to get home if they're commuting, for example, and really be able to switch off. And in order to recharge, that's the important thing I think here to highlight, is that you need that space in order to recharge, to keep your resilience up to some of these pressures in the environment that are going to get you down that slippery slope and unhealthy behaviours to develop. Secondly, I think it's worth calling out work addiction. It was kind of alluded to as what we've spoken to at the moment, but I think we're seeing a rise in work addiction linked to that work-life balance being slightly off. People are or tend to be addicted to that high, that dopamine release in the brains of always being switched on, always being able to produce that level of that work for bosses and having that feedback come back to them instantaneously. And then finally, the use of digital, because we can't ignore it. You can't go into an office and not be digital, even though you're maybe not on your smartphone. You are linked into Teams calls or Zoom calls. You are part of digital, just because the way our office life is emerging. And don't forget the tools that we've been mentioning. So whether it's an app on your phone or a social media platform, they are designed to keep us as customers coming back. They specifically speak to our dopamine in our brains to keep us coming back for more. So just being aware that that is something that we're battling and making sure that we're putting in the place the support to help people recognise that and to combat against it.
Great, thank you. I do think having clear lines about what you will and won't do with work, where it stops, and everyone knowing that is kind of super important, isn't it? Definitely. Yeah. Cool. Right. Okay, Harj, I'm coming back to you. So, in your experience, how did workplace stress contribute to the development or worsening of your addiction?
So, breaking it down, it was more of a case of if you're not seen working, you're not working. So I'd arrive early at work to show that I was working, and I'd leave late to show that I was working harder. I think this comes down to a dialogue, especially for men growing up. You know, you've got to work hard, you've got to put the grind in, you've got to put the effort in, otherwise you won't get that promotion, you won't get that pay rise. So what was happening is, like I said, because it's so silent, they would see me working, but more importantly, I was just gambling. And the psychological effects mentally off the back of that, the eating disorders, the sleeping disorders, you know, the stresses, the anxiety, the depression, the ups and downs. Well, I've just lost £8,000 sitting on a loo in half an hour. And it was a true story, that's my thingy. And, you know, losing almost £20,000 in 24 hours. You see, for every action, there's a consequence. See, we are the ones having the actions, but we're not realising that how's it affecting our loved ones? How's it affecting our peer groups, our support network in our work? If we're managers and we're suffering this, how's that showing up as our leadership? So part of all this is workplaces don't actually have proper policies in place. 90% of corporate organisations don't even have a gambling in the workplace policy. They just mix up something that's substance abuse of drugs and alcohol, amalgamate together, hoping that's something that's going to be in place. Whereas someone like myself, where I'm looking at every different way of trying to fund my addiction. And it's hard to say this, but I committed fraud. You know, I stole, I begged, I borrowed just to constantly fuel my addiction. And one of the superpowers of people that have a gambling addiction is their super resourcefulness, but just in the wrong discipline. Whereas if they understood how to, like I said, the psychological aspects and the habits that someone's facing, but they can channel that into something more productive that's going to give them a better outcome. That's the shift that needs to happen. But that comes through changing the dialogues from growing up. You know, from a young age, I was told to man up, get on with it. You know, there are people worse off than you. So growing up, a lot of men are afraid to speak up about the problems, especially men from what I call manual laboured or skilled laboured work ethics. So construction industry, HS2, we see them, there's statistics around this, which is they are the ones that tend to be more in the gambling addiction. One, because there's no policies in place. Two, they have a bit of free reign, but it comes down to what's affecting them on the bottom line, finances. So if I'm talking about mental health in the workplace, is that men are just too afraid to open up and speak about their problems. And ultimately, organisations don't have a place where they know where to get the support from.
Yeah, obviously it comes back to that environment, doesn't it? So, Caroline, I'm going to come back to you next. So how can organisations identify and understand specific workplace triggers that may contribute to addictive behaviours?
So we've touched a little bit on this already, but I think it's undoubtedly the biggest one is getting the time to really understand your people, really connect with your employees on that personal level, and keep that channel of communication open. So it means one-to-ones with managers, really close teamwork. So you can spot when things start to go a little bit different, which can often be that first change in behaviour can be the marker of something bigger going on under the surface, like we've spoken about. And the triggers and the behaviours are going to be different from one company to the next. Regular surveys, encouraging feedback during one-to-one meetings, focus groups, so you're going proactively out there to listen to your people and employees, for people ultimately to feed back on how they're feeling as well, and creating these type of forums where people feel they can open up. We've done some work recently with one of our corporate clients to encourage men in the workplace to feel that they have a forum where they can speak about some of these issues and stressors, and just be open with one another. And we know from the research there's actually great studies out there around creating environments where particularly men feel comfortable in opening up. For instance, having a football club where it's relaxed, it's impersonal, it's not work focused, actually encourages people to open up a lot more. And then finally, understanding the factors, so looking to the research to find out what could be and upskilling yourself on what could be leading to those addictive behaviours. So like we spoke about, the common factors that lead to addiction, and just having that sort of at your forefront of your mind, so you're fully informed as to what could be driving those behaviours.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. We've got loads of questions coming in, so thank you very much. Keep them coming. I'm going to keep us moving so that we can get some of those. So next to you, Harj, from your experience, what signs or behaviours should employers be aware of to identify potential addiction issues in the workplace?
So the biggest thing is characteristics and behaviours. So if someone is losing weight, that's a gradual momentum of someone doing something. But the erratic behaviours, the emotional imbalance, so just having a bit more awareness. So now that you know that there's 1 in 10 in an organisation, just being a little bit more aware. Now that we're coming back into the workplace, we're doing more meetings, we're having one-to-ones, having just that awareness of just saying, is this person okay? Because most times we go into meetings and we're just tick boxing the productivity and we're forgetting the people in the process. So maybe just asking them, is everything okay? Is there anything we can support you with? And having that open dialogue, by conversations, will allow a way that someone can get signposted or support they need. But ultimately, just having a look and just being more observant around your surroundings. And from a company's perspective, you know, having better EAP policies would be one thing to do. And also having better self-exclusions. Because now that we've got company credit cards more available, you know, we can spend. So having those self-exclusion tools that are available on company devices, because now we've got the BOYD coming more into play because everyone is now bringing their own devices, setting policies in place that these are the practices and standards that the company adheres to, because then what that does to the individual, it sets a standard. And you'll be surprised just having standards, because if people don't have standards, they'll go on a loose tangent, speaking. So just setting things in place that someone can just go, if I do this, this is the consequence of something happening. So having that awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. So setting the policies, standards, but all the way through to then leadership being open, encouraging, knowing your people. You know, it's kind of a top to bottom, isn't it? From the documented all the way through to the softer skills.
Well, even so, another statistic that came out by the Gambling Commission that said, out of the problem gamblers, you know, 16 to 24-year-olds are classed as 34% of people falling into problem gamblers, which is now showing that it's stemming from a younger generation, whether it's an apprenticeship, starting in their work organisations. That's now the whole gaming culture. So once again, it's understanding not just what the organisation is happening, but what is happening in society on a more of a different perspective that could be assisting, whether it's addiction, which then leads to drinking, because obviously on TVs and films, what do we see? Stressful day, they get home, they open up a bottle of wine. These are little subconscious triggers that one takes on. So just having a different perspective, looking at what's happening in the world around him, which then could influence certain patterns of behaviours within the workplace.
Great, thank you very much. So Mark Antonio, I'm going to come back to you now. Yeah. So what emerging challenges in addiction and mental health are anticipated for the future? And what should employees be mindful of?
Difficult one to answer. In terms of addictions, I think that the behavioral addictions are going to pose the biggest difficulty to organizations. Platforms will become more sophisticated, access is much easier, so that we go back to this point that there has to be a lot more education, even in the workplace. So about how to use this technology, when does a day begin, when does a day end. Both educational settings and work settings have almost become places that have been outsourced by society to provide this education. So, for example, universities were not a place where, you discuss mental health 20 or 30 years ago. You either went to university and coped, or you dropped out. Whilst now, it's expected that universities work, and I think the reality is we have to, at university, main setting where I work, we have to take care of our students and understand that society has changed. The same applies to the workplace. If companies do want to achieve productivity, they need to become educated about a variety of factors that affect addictive behaviors, educate staff, make sure that awareness is full and present, and we'll probably discuss this earlier with managers, etc. But in terms of trends, returning to trends, I would say that the behavioral addictions are the most dangerous, in inverted commas, because if you look at gambling, I mean, in the UK, between the ages of 11 and 16, we have 60,000 already problem gamblers. Those people are going to join the workforce in the next few years. So the behavioral addictions cost a lot more than we think we do. The other one that I've been doing a lot of work on is the use of prescription drugs. So again, you form dependencies on prescription drugs, but they are extremely dangerous to people. So the availability of benzos, of antidepressants, of antipsychotics, cocktails people take that nobody is aware of at work, but they have a very significant impact on work performance. The one point I wanted to just throw in, which is not entirely related to your question, but it's a shift in understanding. It's that mental health problems are on a continuum. It's not that you are unwell or well. And a lot of the time, if we wait for people to get to that point where they're totally unwell, where they enter the sort of sphere of a proper psychiatric disorder, it's too late. We constantly move up and down a continuum in our lives. We can feel very well at times and quite distressed. And we need to capture that continuum before you pass that threshold. When you pass that threshold, then you become a compulsive gambler, or you become alcohol dependent, or you game 40 hours a week, most of them at night, so you get to work half asleep. It's too late. It's extremely... So we need a lot more prevention and awareness work. And the acceptance that if we're moving up and down, we can catch things quite early and move back down the spectrum to a sort of place of quite, reasonable health.
So getting in early is super important.
Getting in early and knowing what's happening, yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Right.
Let's add to that real quick.
Yeah.
So part of this as well, because we've been speaking about the employees as well, but also let's look at from the business and the corporations. So having a proactive approach, will stop that reactive situations, because having work policies in place, there's financial losses and protecting the assets. Because if there's a massive hit in the financial losses of an organisation, that doesn't just impact the one individual, it impacts all the other people that are in the organisation that's employed by them. So having robust work policies in place, it's an agreement, because agreements basically avoid disagreements, if I'm being honest with you. And understanding why companies need to protect their assets and their employees is super important, because there's obviously everything that goes around it. Because if you've got someone in the workplace that's maybe taken thousands, if not tens of thousands of pounds, there's the PR, there's everything that goes across with it. Hence the reason why I was asked to resign, because the company I was working for at the time didn't want this to become very apparent.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have nothing in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So look, we're going to move on now to our final discussion point, which is how businesses can stay ahead of emerging trends in addiction. And Caroline, I'm going to come to you first. So how can organisations adapt and inform strategies to address addiction challenges that are not just applicable to now, but also in the future?
So I think it's worth reiterating a point that Haj made is once you know about the research and evidence and what's going into those addictive behaviours to make them emerge, make sure they translate into policy and practice. So just don't collect the data and let it sit there. Make sure it's informing proactively policies and practice around the business. I would also shout out the importance of trickling this knowledge and this research insights down through the management tree. So it's not just for leaders and managers to know about, it's for managers to be, and people managers, and then below them to be living and breathing these policies and practices and delivering it to their people. in the very basic sense, do people know about the EAP services that are available to them? We often see with EAP that people don't reach out until the real crisis point. And actually, more can be done before that crisis point. So it's about recognising those small little inroads, and the basic point there is make sure people know about EAP and what's available to them. And the flip side of that, being proactive about asking people around the company what they would like. If it's an EAP that is being provided but no one's using it, or they're using it in not the anticipated way, then change it up. Speak to employees around what they would value more. So make sure you've got the right type of support in place if what you've got isn't working already. And I guess as all of these incremental changes that we've been speaking about are ultimately building up to a culture of change. So small behaviours build up to that culture where people who are struggling with addiction don't feel stigmatised and feel able to open up. So think of that as the end point, not just providing a solution. You're building a new culture.
Absolutely. So environment, culture, and making people aware of everything that there is to support them
Absolutely,
already.
yeah.
Great, thank you. So Haj, I'm coming back to you. So in shaping a forward-thinking culture, what strategies can employers implement to address a wider spectrum of addictions in the future?
So 2 words: execution and education. So educating team leaders, managers, C-levels about the different types of addictions that are out there, whether they're behavioural or substance, and what they can do proactively to see the signs, to have the awareness and create the preventions. Secondly, we talk about EAPs. You know, the workplace policies is really going to help create massive compliance in organisations. And then thirdly is what they have access to. Because some people might not want to come out fluently and say, well, I've got a problem. So something that we're working on is, well, how do you have an anonymous learning tool where they can still get access to some of the signposting, the self-exclusion, some of the behaviours that we talk about, some of the patterns that someone's going through, just so they can feel heard and be seen, even if it's just through a screen. You'll be surprised that people can now feel heard, and they've got now the tools, the resources and access to get the help that they need. That's where the execution comes in, because there's no point just thinking about doing something without actually implementing doing that thing. Because I've seen organisations do this. They'll sit around, have great conversations, and also learn what Bupa are doing right now. These discussions, these points of arguments or debates are so crucial to building a sustainable future, not just for the employees, for the organisations. This is why education at the forefront, because you're learning to contribute and grow, with the execution applied to it, is going to make massive strides going forward.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have a bill?
Yeah, I wanted to add one more element to that. So the 2 elements are key, and the third one is what I would call surveying, and we've discussed it already. It doesn't take that much for companies to have regular surveys that don't focus necessarily on engagement. Okay, that's important too, but monitor fundamentally the mental state of staff, because you can get clear indicators early on about deviations from sort of the norm for certain staff members, and you can have systems by which the person can be notified that something may be going on, and already quite a few companies are doing it, and in a completely confidential manner seek support in a variety of different ways, even through technological platforms that can be used in a beneficial way. So sort of preemptive work or prevention type work, especially through surveys. We have witnessed, and I've been involved in some work and research in the area that has a massive impact, saying to people, by the way, you scored in a certain way, just to let you know that scoring like this on this questionnaire might mean X. Do you want to have a word? Do you want to know a little bit more? Nobody in the business will know who you are. This is who to contact.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
So it comes back to Insight really understanding your workforce really well, then educating and providing ways to get that help.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so coming to you for the final one on this, Caroline. Is Bupa planning to develop or enhance its addiction support in the future?
Yes, so we currently cover a range of addictions at the moment, including gambling, drugs, alcohol, abuse and other impulsive disorders. And depending on the level of cover for patients, they might also be eligible for rehab stays, inpatient rehab stays. And then later this year, we're looking at a new pathway for addressing addiction and focusing on that before reaching crisis point as a new pathway, which really, I think, reflects our commitment as a business to be more proactive about that, what's needed to tackle that addiction.
Great, thank you very much. Excellent. I'm sure people will find their account managers to ask all about it. So, right, let's get on to the Q&A. We've got a few questions here. I'm coming to you first, Mark Antonio. We were talking about this before, actually. So this is about our children. So I worry children are more susceptible to addiction from a very early age, screen time, gambling, YouTube. And what behaviours will that lead to when they're older? So, what behaviours will it lead to? And also, how can we support our children?
Isn't this called synchronicity? When Jung called it synchronicity.
Yeah.
But so this is the most popular question I get at webinars. Whatever the subject matter, we were discussing exactly this, is adolescents, young people, technology use beyond social media. We now have guidelines. In fact, we've published them. I've published them with other academics. I think 10 of us have published guidelines 3 or 4 days ago in the journal Addictive Behaviors. Only 5, and I'll be able to share them. One of them is the modeling of the correct behavior at home. Another is the actual availability and type of technology that is given to young people, and that golden cutoff age, which is 13 years of age, as we were discussing. I believe it, half an hour ago. The problem with the introduction of technology early on in life, it affects all these systems that are developing. That's why I think we can safely say that we're seeing an increase in ADHD. Well, this increase in ADHD is not due to some kind of evolutionary change in the human setup of our brain. It's simply that children are given technology, it's distracting, they don't learn to control their attention correctly. And coming back to the question is that if we do not impose quite rigid control over technological access in those first 13, 14 years of life, the costs of not doing what is right but not easy in youth are enormous in life. From social anxiety to problems of concentration, recall, all sorts of issues that my generation wouldn't have experienced because there was really no technological access. So the work has to happen in 2 settings. Within the family, with clear boundaries and discussions very early on, like one would have had with other drugs in the past. By the way, if you end up using alcohol excessively, this was heroin is a dangerous drug. So those conversations have to start at the age of 7, 8, 9, when this technology is available, and then very, very strict boundaries. Even if these mean that the child or the young person will not be part of certain social groups, well, that's fine, so long as they can resist with the support of their family up until 13 or 14. They might even benefit out of this socially. And then the schooling environment, which is what I talked about. Environments where we learn and study, there has to be a total absence of technology during that time of the day.
Yeah.
And there are issues to do with homework being set for young people, or even at university exclusively on technological platforms. That should really be avoided. We should go back to the future. We should go to practices which we had in the past. Right. They're far better for us in youth.
My other son's got great news tonight. Another 3 years waiting for a smartphone. It strikes me, though, that the worry of parents about their children, as you say, this question comes out most often. I mean, that will affect parents in the workplace as well, worrying about their children and how they might be, getting addicted to all these different things as well. You had a build on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, we have to look at what's happening in society, right? So I look in a different perspective. The rise of influencers, stream platforms, so they're seeing these quote-unquote influencers, smoking, doing shisha, drinking, gambling. We're seeing the rise of crypto casinos. So what is it that they're watching? We've also seen massive links to gaming and gambling, and then these young children taking the parents' credit cards and waking up with 500 up to maybe £10,000 spent on gaming. Now, it's those things that what are the children doing and where they're spending most of their time. Is it gaming? So what can the parents do to create a barrier of money to access the very thing? So also where they're spending their time. Is it on social media? But what they're watching on social media, are they on streaming? What are they watching on social streaming? So really being careful about what your children are accessing, who they're accessing, and where they're getting influenced by.
Can I add, because that is a route to the early development of addictive behaviors, exactly as you said, and to what Caroline discussed before about these dopamine hits.
Yes.
So the dopamine hits should be coming from other activities, socializing, exercise, a play at school. Those should be the dopamine hits.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the availability of technology at an early age, and it's really difficult to control from a parental point of view or caregiver point of view, is that these dopamine hits are being sort of achieved through the completely wrong platforms. And it's very, very difficult to unlearn them. In fact, we can never unlearn anything in life. We can only learn new behaviors that inhibit old behaviors. So we end up having a repertoire of dopamine hits for the incorrect behaviors, and then we reach the age of a teen thinking, well, actually, there are other things in life. There's a theater, there's music, there's other things aside from the influencer that I would like to get a dopamine hit. There's even the stadium, or watching football live, or whatever it is. But then at that point, people need to build almost a new repertoire that inhibits these old habits of just checking the phone frequently and seeing whether I've got a like, And so it's not that is forgotten and replaced. Unfortunately, it's there forever.
Brilliant, thank you. Look, I feel like we could go on all day, but I
Cool,
think we've come to the end of our time now. We've got some extra questions, so we'll make sure that we respond to those after the event in the wrap up. But thank you so much for all of your time. It's been a fantastic discussion. I mean, it strikes me that this is massively oversimplifying what we've discussed, but having the right policies, standards in place with the right culture, and reminding people of all the support that they have available to them is super important in this agenda. So this brings our session to the close. Look out for our next event on fertility, shaping inclusive workplaces in May. And remember to check out our Academy for practical health and wellbeing tools to support your people. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.